Elijah Ward stood frozen blood on his shirt, but none of it his. Moments ago he'd tried to stop a fight. Now a teacher pointed at him screaming. He started it. The security guard didn't ask questions, just slammed him against the locker. As students filmed, one whispered, "They always blame the quiet ones." But when the footage leaked, nothing was what it seemed. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Greenridge High looked like any other suburban public school. Freshly mowed football fields, beige brick walls streaked with age, and hallways echoing with the usual adolescent chaos. But beneath the fluorescent hum of classroom lights and the rhythmic slamming of lockers, something quieter persisted, something that people chose not to see. Elijah Ward sat in room 207, back row, far left, the chair next to the window, second from the end. He always chose that seat, not out of preference, but routine. It gave him a view of the trees outside, and more importantly, it placed him in the teacher's blind spot. To most of the faculty, he was just that quiet black kid. Some didn't even know his name. He never raised his hand. He never disrupted. He turned in his work on time, when it was collected, which wasn't often in classes where teachers had already decided who mattered. His papers were usually returned without a grade, or sometimes not returned at all, and no one noticed. Elijah the Mute. That's what some students called him. It started freshman year, a nickname muttered during lunch, passed along like gossip, stuck like gum under desks. No one had ever heard him speak at length. A yes here, a no there, but not full sentences, not opinions, not conversation, not identity. The truth was, Elijah had learned long ago that silence could be armor, that words, when heard through certain ears, could be twisted, mocked, used as evidence against you. And at Greenridge, armor was essential. His skin was the first thing people saw. A deep, rich brown that made him stand out in nearly every class. The student body was 81% white, the rest a scattered mix of otherness. Diversity at Greenridge was a checkbox on the website, not a lived experience. The guidance counselor once told Elijah's mother during a parent-teacher conference, "He just doesn't seem engaged. He reads 3 grades above level," his mother replied, voice taut. "He was writing essays at 10. Yes, well, he's just not very participatory." That was code. Elijah knew the codes. A disengaged meant quiet. Black boys who didn't smile on command. Unmotivated meant he didn't join clubs where he'd be the only one who looked like him. Lax leadership meant no teacher ever asked him to lead. Every hallway at Greenridge had its invisible lines. The AP track, the general ed path, the remedial classes. Elijah had been nudged into general classes, despite testing high in middle school. The school called it appropriate placement, but appropriate for whom? Still, Elijah said nothing. He kept his head down, hoodie up, notebooks tidy, and eyes forward. It was easier that way. Less room for misinterpretation, less room to be accused of being aggressive, or difficult, or the worst one, suspicious. Because at Greenridge, silence kept you out of trouble. At least that was the lie, Elijah told himself. There were moments, though. Slips. Times when the thoughts inside him burned too bright to contain. Once in English class, a teacher misinterpreted a line from James Baldwin, and Elijah's hand twitched toward the air, but stopped midway. No one noticed. Another time, he corrected a mistake in Spanish class under his breath. The student next to him gave him a look, half surprised, half amused. "Didn't know you spoke," he said. Elijah didn't respond. At home it was different. The walls of their 2-bedroom apartment on Ashmont Lane knew his voice well. They had heard it in English, Spanish, and sometimes Swahili when his mother was on the phone with relatives overseas. He had learned French from an aunt who stayed with them one summer. Mandarin came from a strange year, when he became obsessed with documentaries on international diplomacy. He learned quietly, consumed knowledge like oxygen, but never showed it in public. What for? Recognition? Recognition had never done him any good. His mother, Lorraine Ward, worked 2 jobs, day shift at a bank, night shift cleaning offices downtown. She used to work in policy, back in Nairobi, before they fled during political unrest. In America, her degree meant nothing, but her pride in Elijah meant everything. "You carry legacy in your mouth," she'd say, pressing her palm to his chest. "Don't let this country steal your voice." But he did, or at least he thought he had. Most teachers didn't ask him questions. They were more comfortable with the loud kids, the ones who laughed during lectures, who had parents that donated to the PTA, who played varsity sports. Elijah existed between the lines. In group projects he was given the role of recorder, never presenter. He typed, they talked. Every so often, a teacher would try, "Elijah, do you have any thoughts?" they'd ask. But it was always last minute, always obligatory, their eyes already scanning the room before he could answer. It wasn't a real invitation. It was box checking, and Elijah wasn't interested in being a diversity checkbox. So he gave them nothing. And in return they gave him exactly what he expected. Indifference. Until the day Miss Calder walked into room. She wasn't supposed to be there. Mr. Rallins, the usual French teacher, had taken medical leave, unexpectedly. The class didn't care. Sub-days were cheat days. But the woman who walked in wasn't what they expected. Mid-30s, sharp eyes and an accent that placed her somewhere between Montreal and New York. She didn't pass out worksheets. She didn't sit behind the desk. She spoke rapid French from the moment she entered, writing on the board without introducing herself. Most of the class sat up in confusion. A few whispered jokes, but Elijah leaned forward just slightly. She turned around suddenly. "Quoi qu'ici peut lire ceci?" she asked, tapping a sentence she had just written. Silence. She waited. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then 3. "Elijah," she said suddenly, eyes locking on him. "Read it." Heads turned. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. "Elijah doesn't talk," someone muttered. Miss Calder didn't smile. "Well then," she said softly, "today seems like a good day to start." Elijah hesitated. The room swam with eyes. Sweat gathered at his temple. He considered saying nothing, but something in her gaze wasn't mocking. It was expectation. He exhaled. And then, in flawless French, he read, "Les mots ont le pouvoir de briser les chaînes du silence." Words have the power to break the chains of silence. The room fell into stunned quiet. Someone dropped a pencil. Miss Calder didn't flinch. She nodded once. "Again," she said. But slower this time, for their sake. Elijah read it again, and then again. By the third time, the class was no longer breathing. Miss Calder smiled now. Just slightly. "Merci, Elijah." She turned back to the board, continuing her lesson. But everything had already changed. Miss Calder pulls Elijah aside after class, and what she discovers shakes her. The bell rang, but no one moved. Students sat frozen in their chairs, their eyes locked on Elijah like they'd just witnessed an impossible glitch in reality. Even the usual clatter of backpacks zipping and sneakers squeaking across tile floors was absent, replaced by stunned silence. Elijah stood still, his voice still echoing in the room like a ripple that had no shore to crash into. Miss Calder nodded again, casually, like what had just happened was perfectly ordinary. "Merci à tous," she said, writing a few phrases on the board. "Homework is posted online. Bonne journée." And just like that, the spell broke. Chairs scraped, whispers rose, and the students stumbled out of room 207, with sideways glances at Elijah, as if they had never truly seen him before. Because they hadn't. But Elijah didn't move. He stayed in his seat, eyes fixed on the sentence he'd read aloud, just moments ago. "Les mots ont le pouvoir de briser les chaînes du silence." He'd read it flawlessly, his voice calm, precise, and deeply rooted in Parisian cadence. It wasn't just the fluency, it was the weight behind his tone. Every syllable sounded lived in, like language wasn't just something he learned, it was something he breathed. Miss Calder gathered her materials slowly, deliberately. She waited until the last student had left, until the hallway noise softened, then walked to the back of the room and leaned against the desk in front of Elijah. 5 years teaching French, she said finally, crossing her arms. "I've never heard a student sound like that, and definitely not here." Elijah looked down at his notebook, its cover frayed and corners curled from too many months without a backpack to protect it. He didn't respond. She didn't press. "How long have you been speaking French?" "A while," he said softly. "That wasn't classroom French," she added. "That was practiced, accented, native level." Elijah looked up slowly, his gaze cautious, weighing the cost of truth. "My aunt lived with us when we first moved to the States. She was from Lyon." Miss Calder raised an eyebrow. "You picked that up from your aunt?" He shrugged. "And a lot of listening, reading, watching." She studied him for a moment, then said, "What other languages do you speak?" Because that wasn't normal. That was exceptional. And this school, she paused, choosing her words, has a habit of mistaking brilliance for invisibility. I want to make sure I'm not part of that. The words hung in the air. Elijah's silence stretched long, filled with years of hesitance, of being reduced and ignored. But something in her tone, firm, direct, unapologetic, felt different. Spanish, he said finally. Swahili, Mandarin, Arabic. Miss Calder blinked. That's 5. You speak 5 languages? Elijah nodded. And yet, she said carefully, your teachers have you in general ed. No APs, no honors. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She glanced at the attendance sheet on her clipboard. Has anyone ever tested you for gifted placement? Miss Calder sat down in the chair next to him. For a moment the room felt like a vacuum, as if the rest of the building no longer existed. I'm not like the others here, she said. I don't like walls, especially the kind built from assumptions. You'll get in trouble for this, Elijah said, voice low but certain. For what? For noticing me. She smiled grimly. If that's the cost of doing what's right, I'll pay it. Elijah said nothing, but the lines around his eyes softened slightly, an almost imperceptible shift, like a crack in old concrete. I'd like to talk to the principal, she said. With you. We need to document this. They need to see. Elijah stiffened. That won't end well. Why not? Because when people like me get noticed, they don't get promoted. They get profiled. The weight of those words fell like thunder. Miss Calder leaned back, absorbing them fully. You're right, she said. And that's exactly why we can't stay quiet. He looked at her then, really looked. There was no pity in her eyes, no savior complex, just quiet rage. The kind only people who've seen systems fail know how to carry. The bell rang for the next period, and voices began to fill the hallway once more. I'll walk you to your next class, she said, standing. He hesitated, then picked up his notebook and followed. The hallway fell into a hush as they passed. Heads turned, eyes lingered. Someone whispered, Yo, is that Elijah with the French teacher? Another, did you hear him talk today? They reached his next classroom, world history. The teacher was already inside, taking attendance. Don't thank me yet, she replied. We're just getting started. She turned and walked away, heels echoing against the tile floor. Inside the history classroom, Elijah found his usual seat in the back. But this time, he didn't shrink into it. At the front of the school, Miss Calder made her way to the administrative office. She didn't knock before entering. Principal Darren Royce looked up from his computer. Yes? I need to speak with you. Now, it's about a student. He raised a brow. Is this about behavior? No? She said, her voice sharp. It's about brilliance, and what this school has failed to see. Royce leaned back, annoyed. You've been here one day. One day was enough, she said, placing her clipboard on his desk. Let me tell you about Elijah Ward. Outside, a storm was brewing, both literally and figuratively. Dark clouds rolled over Greenridge, matching the rising tension in its classrooms. But something else was coming too. Change. The next day, Elijah is called into the main office. But it's not the principal waiting for him. It's someone else entirely, holding a file that shouldn't exist. The next morning came drenched in overcast gloom. The sky sagged with gray clouds, mirroring the unease quietly spreading across Greenridge High. Whispers about Elijah had already begun to circulate. Students mentioned his name with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, like it belonged to a myth rather than a person. Most of them didn't even know what he had said, just that he had said something, and that it had stunned Miss Calder into silence, which for a substitute teacher was apparently no easy feat. Elijah walked into the building with his hoodie up, backpack slung low, and eyes forward as usual. But this time, he felt the weight of every glance that clung to him in the hallway. Every look asked question. Every smirk hid suspicion. Every pair of eyes became a microscope, dissecting a boy they'd ignored for years. He turned a corner and nearly walked past the woman who changed everything. Elijah, Ms. Calder called softly from outside the language lab, clipboard in hand, as though she'd been waiting. He paused, his hand tightening on his backpack strap. Yeah? I told Principal Royce I needed you for an assessment, she said. Independent study protocol. He frowned. I didn't sign up for anything. She stepped closer. You didn't have to. Just trust me, okay? Her voice didn't carry the authority of a teacher. It carried something rarer, sincerity. He hesitated, then followed her through a quiet hallway into a small room at the end of the foreign language wing. There was no whiteboard here, just a round table, a laptop and a box of unused headsets stacked in the corner. He sat. She didn't. "I want to hear the rest," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "Spanish, Swahili, Mandarin, Arabic, one at a time." He raised an eyebrow. "You think this is going to prove something?" "No," she said. "I think you've already proven it. I just want to understand it." Elijah looked away for a moment, then drew in a breath like he was bracing against a cold wind. He started with Spanish, fluent, fast, polished, like someone who'd lived in it. He didn't just know the words, he understood the cadence, the subtleties of tone. Then Swahili, his accent softer, shaped by family conversations over cheap dinners and old stories from Nairobi. Mandarin came next, and that one shocked her. The way his tongue shifted effortlessly, rhythmically. It wasn't textbook pronunciation. It was intuitive. Then, finally, Arabic. When he spoke it, he slowed down like the words were heavier, more painful to carry. His voice dropped to a near whisper. The room felt different, denser. There was something about the way he pronounced each syllable, carefully, almost reverently, like he was invoking a memory.
Ms. Calder didn't speak. She didn't take notes. She just listened.
When he finished, the silence between them was not awkward. It was weighty. She sat down finally, slowly, placing her hands on the table. "You speak like you've lived 3 lifetimes," she said. "Where did you learn all of that?" Elijah gave a small, humorless laugh. "You don't get fluent in pain. You get fluent because of it." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then met her eyes for the first time that morning. "Spanish came from the neighborhood we lived in, when we first moved here. My mom didn't speak it. I had to translate for her at the corner store, the bus stop, the hospital. Swahili was home. That one was ours. It's how my mom prays, how she talks about the past." He paused. "Mandarin was the language of discipline. Boarding school, we lived next to in Ohio. They didn't want me there, but I could hear everything through the vents. I started repeating what I heard, picking it up. No one noticed I was listening." He glanced at the wall, jaw clenched. "And Arabic. Arabic was from the refugee family upstairs, when we lived in subsidized housing. They lost their son. I used to help the dad with his English. He taught me Arabic instead." Miss Calder was quiet for a long time. "That's not the kind of story you read in any school profile." "It's not the kind they care about," Elijah said. "To them, I'm still just the quiet black kid with the wrong zip code." She flinched at the bluntness. But he wasn't wrong. "Elijah," she said carefully, "do you know what your academic file says about you?" He nodded. "Not much. No gifted indicators. No language aptitude. Just vague behavioral notes from years ago. A lot of does not participate, and withdrawn." Elijah leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. "Yeah, that's how they keep us in check. They don't fail you outright. They just never see you." Ms. Calder's hands tightened on her clipboard. "And no one's ever pushed for reassessment? No one's ever pushed for anything." She stared at him, struggling to reconcile the institution she worked in with the system she was now staring in the face. "This isn't neglect," she said finally. "This feels intentional. I stopped talking so they'd stop noticing." Elijah said. "It worked. Until yesterday." She nodded, lips pressed into a line. "I'm going to Principal Royce." He blinked. "You said that yesterday." "I meant it yesterday." "The school doesn't change," he said, voice hardening. "It protects itself. You think Royce is going to fix this?" "No," she admitted. "But I don't need him to fix it. I need him to answer for it." He didn't reply, but she could see something shift in his posture, a flicker of cautious respect. She stood. "You okay if I bring your name into this?" He nodded once. "Just don't let them twist it." Her hand paused on the door. "I won't." As she walked down the corridor, she felt the gravity of what she was about to do settle around her shoulders. This wasn't just a student with a unique skill. This was a child systematically buried under bureaucracy, racism, and willful ignorance. She reached the main office and asked to speak with Royce again. He wasn't there. "He's in a meeting," the secretary said, avoiding eye contact. "Tell him I need 15 minutes of his time today," she replied, her voice clipped. "I'll wait." 2 hours passed before Royce finally emerged, visibly annoyed. He gestured toward his office. "You again?" he said flatly. "What's the emergency?" She sat down without being asked. "It's about Elijah Ward." I want his academic record reopened and a gifted reevaluation scheduled immediately. Royce raised an eyebrow. Based on what? Based on the fact that he speaks 5 languages, none of which are listed in his file. Based on the fact that he's been academically sidelined because of racial profiling and neglect. And it's backed by evidence. Royce leaned back, folding his arms. I don't think you understand the logistics here. I understand the logistics just fine, she said. I also understand Title VI and the legal implications of ignoring a student's linguistic and academic abilities based on race. He stared at her, expression unreadable. You really want to push this, Calder? She didn't blink. I already am. He glanced at the door, then reached into his filing cabinet. Pulled out a thick, worn file. You might want to read this before you go making headlines, he said, sliding it across the desk. It's Elijah's original intake file, the one nobody's supposed to see. She opened it slowly, and her eyes froze at the top sheet, because what she saw wasn't just incompetence. It was something worse. A handwritten note buried inside Elijah's file reads, Monitor interactions. Tends to be overly articulate for his background. Flag if necessary. And it was signed by someone still working at the school. The file sat between them like a loaded weapon. Miss Calder stared at the yellowing page, her eyes locked on the handwritten note. Monitor interactions. Tends to be overly articulate for his background. Flag if necessary. Beneath the words, in small slanted cursive, was a name that sent ice through her veins. G. Pullman. She didn't have to think long. Gregory Pullman had been a tenured English teacher at Greenridge for over 2 decades. Respected, protected, the kind who taught to kill a mockingbird every year, and called it progress. The kind who sprinkled diversity into his lesson plans like salt, just enough to check a box. She closed the file slowly, forcing calm into her voice. Where did this note come from? Royce exhaled through his nose, feigning weariness. It was added after a behavioral observation. Pullman said the kid was putting on airs in class. Thought it might indicate something. Like giftedness. Royce didn't answer. Or was it just inconvenient that a quiet black kid used big words? She asked, her tone icy. He shifted uncomfortably. Look, Calder, we don't need to make this into some witch hunt. The school has protocols. This isn't about protocol. This is about how many Elijahs are sitting in these rooms being ignored because their intelligence doesn't match someone's bias. She stood without asking permission. I'm calling a staff meeting. Royce blinked. That's not really within your authority. It is when the system's broken, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't. The next afternoon, the staff room buzzed with low conversation, and the smell of burnt coffee. It was the kind of gathering where real change usually died, slowly, under piles of excuses and bureaucracy. I appreciate you all coming, she began. I know you're busy, but we need to talk about something important, something systemic. Murmurs. An eye roll or two. I want to talk about Elijah Ward. A brief pause. Then a long, low breath from the corner. The quiet kid? Asked Mr. Denham, a geometry teacher. Yes, she said. The quiet kid who speaks 5 languages and hasn't been placed in a single advanced class. The room shifted. Wait, 5? Someone asked. Spanish, Swahili, Arabic, Mandarin, and French, Calder confirmed. Fluently, with native-level comprehension. A long silence. Then, laughter. Not cruel, but dismissive. Come on, said Miss McBride from Social Studies. You're saying this kid just sat on that talent and no one noticed. That's exactly what I'm saying. Well, McBride shrugged. He's always been closed off, hard to gauge. He never speaks, doesn't participate. And whose fault is that? Calder shot back. Have we ever given him a reason to trust us with his voice? Mr. Denham folded his arms. Some kids just aren't a good fit for the fast track. That's not racial. It's academic. Calder took a breath. That's the narrative we've built. But it's a lie. I've seen his file. It's incomplete, misrepresented, and worse, intentionally flagged. She dropped the note on the table. Teachers leaned in. Overly articulate for his background? McBride read aloud, frowning. What the hell does that mean? It means someone thought intelligence was suspicious coming from him, Calder said. And instead of mentoring him, we buried him. The room was quiet again, this time heavier. Then Mr. Pullman entered, late. He walked in with a folder under one arm and a coffee in hand, greeting no one. Greg, Calder said coolly. You've worked with Elijah before, haven't you? Pullman looked up, surprised. Sure. A couple years back. Why? Do you remember adding a note to his file? He blinked. I add notes for all students. Helps me track patterns. You flagged him, she said. Said he was overly articulate. Pullman shrugged. That was observational. The kid was quiet but sharp. Spoke like he was rehearsing. That can be a red flag. A red flag for what? She asked. Sharp now. He took a sip of coffee. You know, some kids mimic well. Doesn't always mean they understand. And I'd heard some things about his home life. Just being cautious. Calder's voice was quiet but deadly. You assumed his intellect was fake because he's black. That's not what I said. It's what you meant. Pullman stood a little straighter. Listen, I've been teaching here for 20 years. I've seen plenty of gifted students. Black, white, whatever. But you can't chase every quiet kid with a thesaurus and call it injustice. Calder stepped forward. You didn't see him. You never saw him. You labeled him, buried him, and moved on. And you weren't the only one. No one spoke. Then Miss Diaz, a newer science teacher, said quietly, I had him in freshman bio. He finished every assignment in half the time. I thought he was cheating. I never asked him how he knew so much. Others started murmuring, stories surfacing like bruises long ignored. Calder let the silence stretch. This isn't just about Elijah. It's about every kid we've misread, because of our own limited lens, our comfort zones, our assumptions. She looked directly at Pullman. You created a paper trail that justified his exclusion, and now that exclusion is policy. Pullman scoffed, trying to retreat into professionalism. If you've got a complaint, take it to the board. I already have, she said, holding his gaze. And they've agreed to audit every flagged file from the last 10 years. Now the silence turned cold. Pullman's face twitched. Why would they agree to that? He asked. Calder lifted her clipboard. Because this story's no longer just in this room. It's being watched. And when people start asking how a multilingual genius was buried by a high school for 4 years, we're all going to have to answer. She turned and walked out, leaving the door swinging behind her. One of the senior staff members followed her into the hallway, voice low. There's something you don't know about Elijah's placement. Something bigger than Pullman. The door to the staff room hadn't even fully closed behind Miss Calder when she heard footsteps catching up to her. Wait, came a low voice. It was Ms. Landon, senior guidance counselor, 25 years at Greenridge, silver hair tied back, reputation for playing safe in every administrative shift. Calder turned. Yes? There's something you need to see, Landon said, glancing around. Follow me. They walked briskly down the hall, past the administrative wing, through a side door that led into the student records archive. A rarely accessed fluorescent-lit vault of metal cabinets and musty paper. The door closed behind them, with a hollow clank. I shouldn't be doing this, Landon muttered, as she unlocked one of the cabinets. But after today's meeting, you need to understand how deep this goes. She pulled out a thick manila folder with a barely legible label. Ward, Elijah D. File Son 237. The top of the folder was bent, the edges soft with age. Calder took it into her hands, like it was a found artifact from another era. The first few pages were what she expected. Demographic info, enrollment history, immunization records. Then came the disciplinary reports. Dozens of them. Petty infractions. Disrupted class. Failure to follow instructions. Nonverbal defiance. Many filed during his earliest years at Greenridge. But something was off. These start in second grade, Calder said, flipping through the pages. Landon nodded. That's when the first incident happened. The playground thing. I heard about that, Calder replied. Sort of. You'll want to see the note at the back, Landon said quietly. Calder kept reading. Page after page, every document painted Elijah as a problem to be managed, not a student to be nurtured. Not one reference to his academic strengths. No mention of multilingualism. No placement tests. No reading assessments beyond third grade. It was a blueprint of neglect. Until the last page. Scrawled in faded ink, barely legible, was a handwritten note. Elijah shows high verbal intelligence. Surprisingly articulate. Be cautious. Behavior may mask deeper issues. Possible early trauma. Consider social adjustment programs before any gifted evolve. It was signed, H. Ramson, second grade teacher. Calder stared at the words, rage mounting beneath her skin. This is how they buried him, she said flatly. They wrote his intellect off as a smokescreen for issues. Landon nodded again. Once that narrative is in the system, it follows them. Every teacher after just believes it. He was flagged as a risk, not a resource, and no one ever corrected it. Calder gripped the folder tighter. No wonder Pullman got away with his note. This file already built the coffin. She turned to Landon. Why are you showing me this now? Landon looked down. Because I helped build that file. Silence. I was the junior counselor back then. I trusted the reports. I didn't question the labels. I didn't ask about his home life or his potential. I just filed what came in. Her voice cracked. I was part of it. And now I see what it cost him. Calder exhaled slowly. The anger in her chest wasn't just at the system. It was at the silence. The chain of adults who passed the burden down the line, each deciding it was someone else's job to see the boy behind the paperwork.
I need to take this, Calder said.
Landon hesitated. It can't leave this room. But you can scan it. Quietly. Within minutes, Calder had her phone out, snapping images of every page. Her hands shook as she captured each piece of evidence, each false narrative, each quiet sabotage. Elijah doesn't even know this exists, does he? She asked. No, Landon replied. Why would he? No one ever told him what the system decided about him before he had a chance to decide anything for himself. Calder nodded slowly. That ends today. Later that afternoon, she sat in her car, parked far from campus, the scanned pages open on her laptop. She read them again and again. Each word, another brick in a wall built to contain a child who had outgrown it before he was even 10. She drafted an email to the district superintendent. Subject: urgent review. Files on 20. But before she hit send, she paused. Something about that last note nagged at her. She zoomed in. The words "behavior may mask deeper issues" were underlined, not once but twice. And beside it, almost invisible in the crease of the paper, was a second, different ink. A smaller, rushed scribble. See incident April 18, nurse's office. Calder blinked. That date was 15 years ago. Well before most of the current staff had even arrived. She scrolled through the photos. There was no April 18 incident report in the file. No nurse's records. No mention of it anywhere. She reached for her phone and called Landon. There's a reference to something that's not in the folder. April 18, nurse's office. You ever see it? A pause. Then, no. That would have been locked in the confidential health file. Separate cabinet. Not even I have access anymore. Who does? Another pause. Only the principal and the district psychologist. Calder stared at the glowing screen in front of her. She closed the laptop slowly, heart pounding. What happened to Elijah in that nurse's office? And why has it been erased from every record, except this one forgotten note? April 18th. The date had been scribbled hastily, like someone wanted it remembered, and then buried. Calder stared at the note again. See incident, April 18, nurse's office. But the report itself was missing, purged from Elijah's file. What kind of school incident gets removed from a child's permanent record? And why would it have warranted hiding in the first place? She closed her laptop slowly, heart tightening. Whatever happened that day, it wasn't just a medical visit. It was a trigger, the beginning of a silencing. She needed to know, and the only person who could tell her was Elijah himself. Speaking to second grade, the memory lived like a splinter in Elijah's mind, never fully removed, always catching under pressure. It had been spring, bright and restless. At recess, the air was thick with laughter and shrieking playground games. Elijah had been sitting alone on the bench near the slide, fingers wrapped around a worn library book on Greek mythology. Even back then, he preferred words that didn't judge him, stories that gave underdogs power. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was never the kid who caused it. That's why, when he heard the screams from behind the big toy structure, he didn't think. He just ran. A girl, a white classmate named Kennedy Albright, had fallen. Her foot was caught in the rope ladder. Her leg twisted unnaturally. She was sobbing, her cheeks streaked with tears and dirt. Elijah dropped his book and climbed up the slide's edge to reach her. He knelt beside her, eyes wide. You're stuck, he said. Don't move. I'll get help. No, don't leave me, she wailed. So he stayed. He tried to lift the rope just enough to ease her foot loose. But the moment her shoe slipped off, she screamed louder. Adults came running. And just like that, it changed. Kennedy's mother worked in the front office. She had arrived for early pickup and saw Elijah leaning over her daughter, heard screaming. Saw brown skin and panic, and filled in her own version of the story. What are you doing to her? She shouted. racing across the mulch. Elijah backed away, hands in the air. She was stuck. I didn't. Kennedy, overwhelmed and still crying, didn't answer. Two teachers reached them seconds later. One knelt beside the girl. The other grabbed Elijah by the arm. Don't struggle, the teacher said under her breath. Just come with me. His book lay in the dirt. He wasn't allowed to pick it up.
They took him to the nurse's office. Not to treat him, but to isolate him.
No one asked him what happened. No one let him call his mother. Instead, they took photos of a scratch on Kennedy's ankle, likely from the rope. They wrote reports that used words like forceful, non-compliant, and inappropriate contact. Later, Kennedy clarified that Elijah had helped her. But it didn't matter. The story had already calcified. The next day, he was removed from recess for behavioral evaluation. His teacher began sitting him near the door. His desk was separated from group tables. He stopped getting stickers on his worksheets. The week after, he was pulled from the gifted reading group. You're smart, his mother told him that night. Don't let them make you doubt that. But doubt had already seeped in, and silence came next. He stopped volunteering to read aloud. Stopped answering questions unless called on. Stopped making eye contact with teachers. He learned that being visible was dangerous. By third grade, he was invisible. And so the voice that spoke Swahili lullabies, that mimicked TV characters, that once asked endless questions about the stars, vanished in public. People would say he's quiet, but Elijah knew better. He wasn't quiet. He was surviving. In the present, Elijah sat in the back of the school library, headphones in, working through an online module on world history. Miss Calder hadn't approached him yet about the April 18 incident. She needed the right time, the right way. But Elijah already knew something was shifting, because his phone buzzed. Again and again, dozens of notifications. He pulled it out, eyes narrowing at the sudden influx of messages. Some were from classmates, others from unknown numbers. A few Instagram DMs. Yo, is this you? Bruh, check TikTok. You're going viral. Didn't know you were a genius. Damn. His stomach sank. He opened the app. A video had been uploaded, taken without his knowledge during his impromptu French reading in room 207. The caption read, "Quiet kid speaks 5 languages like it's nothing. Mind blown. Greenridge High." The video had racked up over 120,000 views in just a few hours. Comments flooded the post. Ain't no way this dude was hiding all that. Respect. But where he from? He sounds like he's trying to be better than us.
But he's not even from here.
Weird flex. Not impressed.
Some were amazed. Some were mocking. Others were thinly veiled racism, dressed as curiosity. He refreshed the app. A second video had been posted. This one wasn't about French. It was a mashup of clips. Elijah in the hallway. Elijah eating alone. Elijah in the background of group photos. Edited with a sarcastic voiceover. When you thought he was mute, but he's just better than you in 5 languages. Laughter. Music. Mockery. It wasn't admiration. It was exposure. He locked his phone. Chest pounding. He could already feel the shift in how people would look at him tomorrow. No longer invisible, but not respected either. Exoticized. Weaponized. Othered. He stood up, stuffing his books into his bag. As he turned to leave, the librarian called softly, "Elijah, there's someone looking for you in the front office." He froze. "Who?" The librarian shrugged. "Didn't say. Just asked for you by name." He took a deep breath. Then another, and walked slowly toward the hallway, toward whatever waited for him next. As he approaches the front office, he sees a reporter through the window holding a notepad with his name on it. The reporter was already scribbling notes when Elijah reached the office window. She stood just beyond the glass, mid-30s, sharp features, phone in one hand, press badge hanging from her lanyard. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes flicked up the moment she saw him approach. "Elijah Ward?" she asked as he stepped into the room. He gave a slight nod, unsure whether to speak. "I'm Sierra Lenz, with the Greenridge Gazette," she said quickly. "Do you have a moment? I promise this won't take long. Just a few questions about the videos." "Videos?" he asked carefully. "TikTok," she clarified, tilting her phone toward him. "Your language skills. Pretty incredible. You're kind of the talk of the school." He didn't answer. "I'd just like a quote," she continued, voice lower now. "Why you think people didn't notice until now, and how it feels to finally be seen." Elijah's mind reeled. The way she phrased it made it sound like a success story. Like he'd won something. But he hadn't. "I have class," he said flatly, and turned away. She didn't follow, but he could feel her eyes tracking him as he left. Every step down the hallway felt heavier. He thought about deleting the apps, locking his account, pretending none of it existed. But the storm had already hit, and it was about to get worse. By lunchtime, the number of views had tripled. People weren't just talking, they were posting. Memes, voiceovers, duets mocking his pronunciation. Some reenacted scenes of him pretending to be a genius. Others added sound effects, like exaggerated boings and record scratches. And then came the second video. The one that changed everything. Someone anonymous, no profile picture, no bio, had posted a blurry video of Elijah in the library, quietly helping a freshman student with an assignment. He was speaking Swahili, patiently breaking down a paragraph. The video was captioned, "Caught this dude speaking terrorist language at school, Greenridge Security, where you at?" Elijah's heart stopped when he saw it. The comments came in fast. Ugly, racist, paranoid. "That's Arabic or some shit. Is he Muslim? Y'all think he's planning something? He been too quiet for too long if you ask me. Yo, I don't feel safe anymore. Ain't he from like overseas or whatever?" The worst part wasn't that they misunderstood what he was saying. The worst part was that they didn't care. Language, once his safe haven, was now being weaponized against him. By seventh period, the school felt different. Hallways parted when he walked through. Teachers glanced at him just a beat longer. Security lingered near his locker, and he knew it had happened. He wasn't just a student anymore. He was a threat. In the staff lounge, Ms. Calder scrolled through her phone with shaking fingers. She'd seen the TikTok reposts. She'd seen the comments. She felt rage bubble in her chest, but also guilt. This wasn't just social media chaos. This was the culmination of every adult who had failed Elijah, including herself. She found Principal Royce in his office. "You need to issue a statement," she said, not asking, demanding. He looked up from his computer. About what? The TikToks, the racism, the implications that Elijah is dangerous. "It's social media," Calder. "Teenagers being stupid." "No," she snapped. "This is defamation. It's targeted, and it's endangering him." Royce sighed, rubbing his temple. "Look, I can call the parents of the kid who posted it, maybe get the video taken down." "That's not enough," she said. "You need to address the school. You need to stand behind Elijah publicly." "I don't want to escalate things." She stared at him, disgust building. "You don't want to protect him either." He didn't respond. "Fine," she said, voice cold. "Then I will." That night, she posted a statement on her private Facebook account. It was long, composed with careful fury. It didn't name Elijah, but it told the story. A student at Greenridge, fluent in 5 languages, has been reduced to a meme. He has been mocked, stereotyped, and accused, because brilliance and black skin still feels suspicious to some. This is racism in the age of algorithms, and it is unacceptable. The post exploded. Parents shared it. Teachers messaged her privately with support. Alumni commented about their own experiences of being the only one in classrooms that never saw them fully. Within hours, the school board's email inbox was flooded. And then something unexpected happened. Someone else spoke up. A verified Twitter account. Dr. Nia Sinclair, a professor of linguistics and alumna of Greenridge High, retweeted Calder's post. "I graduated from this school. They never knew I spoke 6 languages. They assumed I was ESL. Protect Elijah. Let him The hashtag trended locally within minutes, then nationally. Suddenly, Elijah's story was no longer a local curiosity. It was a conversation. And the school board? They took notice. The next morning, an emergency email was sent to all staff. District meeting scheduled. All staff expected to attend. Topic: cultural competency and student equity. For the first time, the system wasn't ignoring Elijah. But as the conversation grows louder, Elijah receives a direct message from someone claiming to be his old second-grade classmate. The message reads, "I remember what really happened that day. You saved me. Can we talk?" The cafeteria buzzed with a strange new tension. It wasn't the usual roar of teenage chaos, but something tighter, controlled whispers, cautious glances, half-formed conversations that stopped whenever Elijah walked past. He moved through the space like a magnet, drawing curiosity and distance in equal measure. At his usual corner table, Elijah sat with his tray untouched. His phone buzzed every few minutes with new comments, reposts, and now, DMs from strangers. But one message hovered at the top of his inbox like a glowing ember. I remember what really happened that day. You saved me. Can we talk? It was signed Kennedy. The name stopped his breath. Kennedy Albright. The girl from the playground. He hadn't heard her name in years. He didn't reply. Not yet. The past was already bleeding into the present faster than he could control. He needed one thing to stay still. Across the room, Maya Jennings watched him carefully. A junior like Elijah, she'd never really spoken to him before last week. She knew who he was. Of course, everyone did now. But she also remembered the years when no one did. She remembered sitting in history class freshman year, watching Elijah complete his worksheet silently in the back, while others cracked jokes and got praise for mediocre work. She remembered the substitute teachers calling him Eli, even though he never once wrote that on a form. She remembered feeling it wasn't right, but not knowing what to do. But now, after seeing the backlash, the memes, the assumptions, the way a school full of diversity banners stayed quiet while racism ran loud, Maya knew silence wasn't an option anymore. That night, she created a petition. Recognize Elijah Ward's brilliance. Greenridge must do better. The text was short, sharp, and unapologetic. Elijah Ward speaks 5 languages. He was never placed in honors, never evaluated for gifted. Instead, he was stereotyped, silenced, and publicly mocked. We demand Greenridge High issue a formal acknowledgement of failure, conduct a district-wide review of placement practices, and recognize Elijah's academic gifts publicly and immediately. By midnight, it had 500 signatures. By 6 a.m., it passed. By the start of first period, it had hit 8,700 with comments flooding in from former students, alumni, and even teachers from other districts. This happened to my son too. Thank you for standing up. Greenridge has always had a reputation for subtle racism. This proves it. Elijah, you're not alone. Keep speaking. Local media picked it up. An education reporter from the Tribune-Sun tweeted the petition with the caption, "The quietest kid in school just became the loudest truth." Elijah didn't know about the petition until a classmate tapped him on the shoulder and whispered, "You seen this yet?" He looked at the screen, saw his name in bold, read the title, then read it again. The cafeteria spun slightly. He walked out. He stopped but didn't turn. "I made it," she said quickly. "The petition. I didn't do it to go viral. I did it because it's what should have been done a long time ago." He turned slowly. "You don't even know me." "I didn't have to," she replied. "I saw enough to know something was wrong. You deserved better. We all do." Elijah studied her. Maya's voice didn't shake. Her eyes didn't flinch. There was no pity in her expression, only resolve. "It's not just about me," he said finally. "I know. That's why I did it." By third period, a printed copy of the petition was taped to the principal's door. By fourth, Channel 7 News had called the school for comment. By lunch, the petition had reached 25,000 signatures. Greenridge was no longer a school. It was a symbol, a mirror held up to every institution that had ever called itself inclusive, while pushing kids like Elijah into quiet corners. Inside the main office, Principal Royce paced furiously. His inbox overflowed. His phone buzzed nonstop. He turned to the vice principal. "Shut it down." "We can't," she said. "It's off campus, student-led. If we interfere, it becomes a First Amendment issue." "Then call the parents," he snapped. "We need them on our side." They tried. But the parents weren't all aligned. Some were outraged for Elijah. Others, outraged by Elijah. That afternoon, an email landed in the school board's inbox from an anonymous parent group, calling themselves Guardians of Greenridge. It was short, cold, legal in tone. "We are deeply concerned about the recent petition and the media attention being drawn to our school. This is a place for learning, not social experiments. We request immediate removal of disruptive students and teachers pushing divisive agendas. If action is not taken, we will explore legal options and escalate to the district level." Attached was a list of names. Maya Jennings, Miss Calder. They weren't asking for discussion. They were demanding silence. As the email circulates through district channels, Maya receives a screenshot from an anonymous number, an image of her face crossed out in red, with the caption, "Watch your back, activist." The invitation came wrapped in formality. An email marked "Confidential School Board Inquiry," appeared in both Ms. Calder and Maya Jennings' inboxes. The subject line read, "Closed session, stakeholder input on recent student activism." The body was brief, bureaucratic and carefully worded. The kind of message that tried hard not to sound defensive while screaming control. It invited them to a private Zoom call with select board members to clarify concerns and ensure balanced perspectives. Calder knew what that meant. Maya knew too. But they accepted. Silence had never served them. And backing out now would only give the wrong people more room to rewrite the narrative. One by one, the boxes populated the screen. Dr. Everett, school board president, gray-suited and unreadable.
Mr. Klein, legal advisor.
Mrs. Tamber, a board trustee known for her passive emails and PTA-friendly politics. And then one unfamiliar face, a woman labeled only as concerned parent, guest access. Calder narrowed her eyes. Maya tilted her head. Assigning blame would imply something went wrong. But from where I'm sitting, the only wrong was ignoring Elijah for years. There was a pause. Mrs. Tamber forced a smile. "We value your voice, Maya. Truly. But our community is diverse in its perspectives." That's when the guest unmuted herself. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her tone cut through the call like ice. "But I need to speak plainly. My son attends Greenridge," she said. "He came home scared. He said a student, Elijah Ward, was speaking in foreign languages loudly in the library, and in class. He felt unsafe, intimidated." Calder's jaw clenched. The woman continued. "I've seen the videos. I've read the comments. And I've spoken to other parents. We're not racist. We just have concerns. You have a young man at the center of a media firestorm, and we don't know what he's capable of. I think for the safety of the student body, he should be suspended, if not permanently removed." The words hung in the air like ash. Maya leaned forward, fire in her voice. "You want him expelled for what? Being multilingual? For being smarter than you expected?" The woman didn't flinch. "We don't know what he believes, or what he's been exposed to." Calder couldn't hold back anymore. "This is disgusting," she said. "You're not describing a threat. You're describing a black boy who made you uncomfortable, and instead of interrogating your bias, you want to exile him from the one space that's already failed him." Dr. Everett raised a hand. "Let's all remain respectful." "No," Maya cut in. "You want respectful. Start by respecting his humanity. You invited us here like this was a dialogue. But it's a trap. You brought someone in to demand his removal. This isn't balance. It's ambush." The silence on the call was suffocating. Just when it seemed the call couldn't sink lower, another window popped up on the Zoom screen. A new participant. No name. Just a silhouette. Then a camera switched on. An older black man appeared, wearing a navy suit, salt and pepper beard, eyes sharp with quiet fury. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said. "I was invited last minute. I was told this was about Elijah Ward." Dr. Everett blinked. Yes. And you are." The man didn't smile. Everyone froze, because what he said next would either end the meeting or set it on fire. Dr. Harold Ayers adjusted his camera slightly, his expression unchanging as the Zoom room fell into stunned silence. The unnamed parent now sat frozen, pearl earrings glinting like spotlights on the silence she had helped create. Dr. Everett leaned forward. "Forgive me, what exactly do you mean by worked with Elijah before?" Ayers folded his hands. 2 summers ago, I was part of a humanitarian team, assigned to coordinate communication during a refugee intake crisis at the southern border. We were dealing with families from East Africa. Many spoke only Swahili or a dialect variant. We were losing time, and then someone recommended a young volunteer who could speak Swahili with clarity and cultural fluency. He paused. That volunteer was Elijah Ward, 14 years old. Calder blinked. Maya covered her mouth. 14? Dr. Everett repeated. "Yes," Ayers confirmed. "He translated for medical staff, legal reps, even for one of our federal agents. I was there. I watched him bring a crying child and a panicked mother back from the brink, just by speaking gently, calmly, in their tongue. We vetted him thoroughly. He passed every security check. We even brought him back the following month for a virtual translation task during a multilingual policy training." He looked directly into the camera. "So let me be clear. The United States government trusted this young man with lives, with diplomacy, with truth. But this school, this community, you've treated his voice like a threat." The unnamed parent began typing in the chat. No one read it. Dr. Everett cleared his throat. This is unexpected. No, it's not, Ayers said firmly. What's unexpected is how a school could overlook a student of this caliber for years, then question his presence the moment he speaks up. Klein, the legal advisor, unmuted. To clarify, none of this is documented in Elijah's academic file. Because your institution never asked, Ayers shot back. You only ask when it fits your template. When a black student fits the narrative you've already written for them, Elijah didn't, so you excluded him. Calder leaned into her mic, her voice tight. Do you hear yourselves now? You want to suspend him for being too visible, too smart, too other. But a federal department saw prodigy. Do you even understand what that says about all of us? There was no response. The call ended 30 minutes later, not with resolution, but silence. The kind that said everything had changed. The next morning, Greenridge High issued a statement. It was posted on their website, printed in the main hall, and emailed to every parent. We recognize that recent events have brought to light serious oversights in our academic evaluation processes. In recognition of Elijah Ward's unique linguistic and cultural capabilities, and in acknowledgement of our institutional failures, we are pleased to offer him a full academic diversity and excellence scholarship to Greenridge Honors Academy. The announcement came with a photo of Elijah, taken from a school ID photo without his permission, cropped and brightened to make him appear palatable. Framed as a moment of progress, not apology. A celebration, not restitution. By the end of first period, it had been shared on every hallway monitor. Elijah saw it during third period on another student's phone. He said nothing, but inside the fire burned. At home that night, Elijah sat at the kitchen table with his mother, Lorraine, the email open in front of them. The glow of the screen lit their faces, as if waiting for one of them to declare it a victory. You deserve this, she said softly. You earned it 10 times over. He shook his head. It's not a scholarship, it's a cover story. She frowned. Explain. They want to fix their image, he said. Not their behavior. They're turning me into their redemption arc. I was invisible for 4 years. And now that they're caught, I'm valuable. Lorraine sat beside him, quiet for a moment. When I left Nairobi, she began, they told me my degree didn't translate here, that I had to start over. So I cleaned floors, processed bank forms, did what I had to do, but I never forgot what I was worth. He looked at her. You don't have to accept scraps dressed up as medals, she said. You've always been enough before they noticed, and after. He exhaled, emotion flickering in his throat. He looked back at the screen, at the digital applause, the disingenuous framing. The next day he walked into the principal's office without being called. Principal Royce was mid-call. Elijah waited. When Royce finally hung up, Elijah placed the printed scholarship letter on the desk. I'm declining, he said, calm but firm. Royce blinked. Excuse me? I'm not accepting your offer. Royce sat back slowly. This scholarship reflects our commitment. No, Elijah said. It reflects your panic and your guilt. Royce's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I'm not your poster boy, Elijah continued. I'm not a box to check or a headline to flaunt. I'm not here to make you feel better about years you can't erase. Royce looked stunned. His fingers hovered over his desk like he wanted to reach for something solid. An excuse, maybe, or a protocol. And if you really want to do right by me, Elijah said, standing, start by fixing the system that let this happen in the first place. Don't reward me, reform everything. He walked out, shoulders square, steps silent. Outside the office, students stared, some with admiration, others with confusion. But Elijah didn't flinch. For the first time, he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. That evening, Maya received another alert. Elijah's story had been picked up by a national outlet. The headline read, The Genius Your School Ignored, a teen polyglot's fight against educational racism. And the last line of the article, Elijah Ward has declined Greenridge's scholarship, but another institution just made him an offer he can't ignore. As Elijah reads the article from his phone, another email arrives, this one from a university he never applied to. The subject line reads, Full ride, no strings. Let's talk. The morning after the national article broke, Greenridge High was no longer just a school. It was a symbol, a battleground, a case study, and like all symbols, it carried a weight most of its leaders weren't prepared to hold. By 7:45 a.m., students were whispering in clusters near lockers, phones glowing with updates. By 8:15, flyers began appearing taped to bathroom stalls, tucked under classroom doors, slipped into textbooks. By 9:00, the first wave walked out. Maya Jennings stood at the front of the courtyard, with a megaphone, her voice shaking only slightly. We walk today not just for Elijah, but for every student whose gifts were buried under bias. We walk for transparency, for equity, for truth. Dozens followed, then hundreds. Classrooms emptied. Teachers stood helpless as desks went vacant, hallways flooded, and the silence that once surrounded Elijah was replaced by a roar. Elijah didn't plan it. He didn't lead it. But when the protesters reached the main lawn, and he was spotted near the back, someone shouted his name. Elijah. The crowd turned. They clapped. They cheered. Some raised fists. Others just looked at him, really looked, and nodded. Recognition, respect, solidarity. For the first time in his life, Elijah Ward wasn't shrinking from attention. He stood at the center of it, not because he asked for it, because he earned it. He stepped up beside Maya. She handed him the megaphone without a word. Elijah looked out over the crowd. He didn't rehearse, didn't plan. "I'm not a speaker," he said. "That's why they thought they could forget me. I was called quiet, distant, not engaged, but what I really was unheard. For years." He paused, scanning faces. "I speak 5 languages. I learned because I wanted to understand people. I stayed silent because I learned most people didn't want to understand me." A hush fell. They saw my silence as emptiness. But silence was my defense. Now I don't need defense. I need truth. Applause erupted. Fists rose. Voices followed. The protests swelled. "Let Elijah speak. This is what justice looks like." But inside the front office, blinds were pulled. Phones rang. The administrative team huddled. Principal Royce stood at the window, face flushed. "This is chaos," he muttered. "We can't let it continue." "It's peaceful," the vice principal said. "Legally, they're not wrong. They've disrupted half the school day. Parents are calling. Media is circling." He picked up the phone. Minutes later, 2 officers from the local precinct arrived, not to arrest but to observe. Still, their presence cast a long shadow across the lawn. The protest didn't end. It grew quieter, but firmer. That afternoon, a memo went out. All students who left class without permission will be marked as unexcused. Disciplinary actions may follow. That night, Elijah received a formal notice in his school email. "Mr. Ward, due to your participation and visible role in today's unsanctioned walkout, we are placing you on temporary suspension while we evaluate violations of school policy." Elijah read it 3 times, then closed his laptop. His mother found him sitting on the floor by the couch, eyes dry, expression unreadable. "They called it a violation," he said. "They called me a violation." She knelt beside him. "They silenced you for years," she said, "and now they're punishing you for being heard." He nodded once. Lorraine Ward. She didn't dress like someone who came for attention. No bold colors, no dramatic flair, just a long navy coat, clean lines, and a scarf knotted at her throat like armor. Her expression held none of the exhaustion that years of quiet battles often etched into women like her. Today, she was fire held in restraint. "Mrs. Ward," a reporter called, voice cautious. "Do you plan to speak?" She nodded once, then stepped forward. "I didn't come here to defend my son," she said, not waiting for microphones to be adjusted. "Because Elijah doesn't need defending. He needs recognition. He needs justice." A few camera shutters clicked. More microphones were raised. "My name is Lorraine Ward. I was born in Nairobi. I hold 2 degrees, one in linguistics, the other in education policy. I was a curriculum designer for Kenya's Ministry of Education before we came here. After the threats on my husband's life escalated, we fled, landed in the US with hope and baggage the system never truly unpacked." She looked directly into one of the lenses. "The American dream said we would be safe, but safety doesn't always mean dignity. And it certainly doesn't mean equity." Lorraine's voice carried with steady rhythm, firm, but not performative. Her cadence felt almost deliberate, like she was teaching, but not from a podium, from experience. Elijah started speaking early. At 2, he could switch between English and Swahili. By 4, he was decoding signs in Spanish. Not because we forced it, because we normalized it. We watched documentaries in French, cooked recipes in Mandarin, Listen to Somali radio. We turned language into love. She paused. But when he entered school, that love became suspicion. Reporters shifted slightly. They told me he wasn't participating. That he didn't raise his hand. That he was withdrawn. Never mind that he completed worksheets in record time. Never mind that he corrected their pronunciation when they read Spanish aloud. They didn't see a gifted child. They saw a quiet black boy, and they made a choice. To overlook him. Another pause. When he was 7, he helped a classmate who'd fallen on the playground. The girl was crying. Her wrist was twisted. Elijah cradled her arm and tried to calm her down. In Swahili. Because he'd heard me do that with his cousins when they were hurt. A teacher saw him kneeling beside her and assumed the worst. She looked away briefly, composing herself. They called it inappropriate contact. That label followed him, through elementary, into middle school. Teachers started keeping notes. Little red marks that said defiant and non-compliant because he didn't speak up. He had learned that his voice could be misinterpreted, so he silenced it. Lorraine's hands were steady, but her voice cracked for the first time. Do you know what it feels like to raise a child who believes their brilliance is dangerous? I fought with administrators, she continued. I asked for evaluations, gifted testing. I sent emails with lists of the languages he spoke. I offered to help them connect with cultural resources. I was dismissed, again and again, told he needed to adjust socially before being considered for academic placement. Her lips tightened. Camera lenses zoomed in. Every word was a scalpel cutting through years of neglect. Elijah translated for the US government during a refugee crisis. At 14, he's held more lives in balance than some adults I know. And yet, this school called him disruptive for walking out with students who finally raised their voices for him. She stepped closer to the microphones. They suspended him. Not for violence. Not for cheating. But for becoming impossible to ignore. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A heavy silence fell. Neglect doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. It whispers when a counselor sees potential, but doesn't recommend. When a teacher notices effort, but never rewards. When a principal hears a parent, but files the concern away. Those whispers become walls, and those walls kept my son in a shadow he never chose. Lorraine looked around the crowd. She saw faces, some ashamed, some defiant, some awakening. I've watched him shrink to survive, watched him learn that language opens doors, but only if the listener is willing to hear. I taught him that every tongue he spoke was a key, and this school locked the doors anyway. She glanced at the school building behind her. You want to talk about accountability? She said, voice rising. Then audit your records. Pull every file. Look at who gets into honors, who gets pushed toward AP, and who gets forgotten. Her eyes locked with a district official near the edge of the crowd. You think you understand equity, but you won't. Not until you admit that silence is not the absence of intelligence. It is the evidence of trauma. A beat passed. And then with one last glance toward the cameras, she said, watch our names. Watch this story, because we're done being footnotes. She turned and walked away. No tears. No dramatics. Just purpose. Within hours, her speech had been clipped and shared across platforms. A mother's fire, Lorraine Ward demands change trended nationally. Educators commented. Parents reposted. Alumni flooded Greenridge's review pages. But the biggest shift came offline. The district superintendent's office called her that evening. No pleasantries. Just a direct voice. Mrs. Ward, we've opened an internal investigation, and you'll want to see what we've already uncovered. Lorraine opens the confidential email attachment sent by the district, a spreadsheet listing years of student placement data, and in red a column labeled Flag for Behavioral Concerns. Elijah's name isn't the only one. There are dozens more, all black, all over. The spreadsheet was dense, coded, and cold. At first glance, it looked like a routine administrative tool. Columns of names, dates, standardized test scores, behavioral flags. But as Lorraine Ward scrolled deeper, patterns began to emerge. Not just in the data, but in the omissions. She recognized some names. Parents from the neighborhood, kids Elijah had mentioned in passing. And next to nearly every name that sounded black or brown, there it was. Flagged for behavioral concerns, sometimes added as early as second grade. No context. No justification, just a digital red mark. There were no corresponding academic flags, no notes of recommendation. No IQ testing. The column for gifted program consideration was blank across the board. Lorraine's chest tightened. This wasn't a failure of perception. It was a system calibrated to suppress a digital paper trail of filtered futures. She kept scrolling. Some names had multiple entries: non-compliant, disruptive, language barrier. Others had the word parent unresponsive typed in, even though she knew for a fact that some of those parents had fought for meetings, filed complaints, pleaded for reassessment. She had stood beside them once at pickup time. At the very bottom of the document was a tab: archived referrals. When she clicked it, the screen flashed for a second, then loaded a list of email chains, internal messages between teachers, counselors, and administrators. The language turned her stomach. Too quiet to lead. Better in general ed. Unclear home situation. Recommend no placement for now. The timestamps went back years. Names rotated, but the tone stayed the same. In nearly every case, the student in question was black. Elijah hadn't been overlooked by accident. He was part of a trend, an algorithm of doubt wrapped in professional tone. Lorraine printed every page. That evening, she met with Maya and Miss Calder at her home. The papers were spread across the kitchen table, highlighted, annotated. This wasn't negligence, Lorraine said. It was protocol. Calder's jaw clenched. I knew it felt bigger, but I didn't want to believe it. Maya flipped through a stack. These are kids I know. Some of them were in my middle school. They used to joke about being too smart for the wrong color. Lorraine looked at her. That joke was a warning. They knew. They worked through the night, building a timeline, from the earliest flagged file to Elijah's suspension. They listed teachers' names, referral trends, repeating phrases. The final document was a 26-page dossier titled Greenridge's Pipeline, a study in racialized gatekeeping. Lorraine sent it to the school board, then to the superintendent, and finally to the press. By the next afternoon, Greenridge High was in crisis mode. Emails were flying, statements were drafted, teachers suddenly took personal days. The district PR team tried to reframe the issue as a data miscommunication, but the evidence was too loud. A local journalist picked it up first, then a state-level education blogger. By sunset, a national outlet had called. The subject line read, "Request for interview, National Education Weekly." Elijah read it 3 times, then looked at his mother. "They want to put my face on TV," he said. Lorraine gave him a long look. "Do you want that?" "It's your story now," she said. "They buried it long enough. But if you speak, make sure it's on your terms." He nodded slowly. In his room later, Elijah stared at the mirror. The boy staring back looked the same. Quiet, watchful, but something behind the eyes had changed. He wasn't just carrying pain anymore. He was carrying proof. As Elijah drafts his response to the reporter, his phone buzzes again. This time it's a direct message from a famous university professor. The message reads, "I've read your story. You remind me of myself. Let's talk about your future." The studio lights warmed slowly, timed with the countdown that ticked silently above the camera. On air in 5, 4, 3. Inside the pristine set of National Education Weekly, everything was polished and staged, except the story that was about to be told. Sitting across from host Elaine Travis was Elijah Ward. He wore a charcoal gray shirt, no jacket, no frills, just the gravity of his presence. His eyes didn't dart or waver. They stared directly into the lens. When it was his turn, steady, full of something that didn't fit neatly into media training. It wasn't just confidence, it was the truth, unvarnished. Elaine's tone, though practiced, held genuine curiosity. "Elijah, thank you for being here with us today." "Thank you for having me," he replied calmly. The first segment began with a brief recap. Archival footage of Greenridge High, footage of Maya's protest, Lorraine's now viral stepside speech, and anonymized screenshots of the exposed documents, behavioral flags, internal emails, the spreadsheet that cracked everything open. The voiceover was surgical, yet emotional. For years, Elijah Ward sat at the back of the classroom, unseen. Today, the nation sees him for what he's always been, a gifted student failed by design. Then, the spotlight shifted. "Elijah," Elaine began, "you've become something of a symbol of institutional oversight, of under-recognized brilliance. But before all that, who were you in your own eyes?" Elijah blinked once, slowly. "I was a kid who loved puzzles, languages, stories. I liked figuring out how people think, how different words could hold the same feelings. He paused. I thought school would be the place where that mattered. But it wasn't. Not for me. Elaine leaned forward slightly. What do you mean? The room was still. I remember one teacher saying, "You're a little too clever, aren't you?" I was 9. Elaine's face hardened. And how did that feel? I didn't know how to explain it at the time, Elijah said. But it felt like every time I spoke, I lost something. A graphic appeared on the screen, a quote over Elijah's face from earlier in the interview. I wasn't silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because I learned no one wanted to hear it. Social media lit up instantly. The quote was clipped, reposted, reshared. By the time the next commercial break ended, it had already been viewed 500,000 times. Back in the studio, Elaine guided the conversation gently into more difficult territory. You mentioned behavioral flags. There were dozens in the school system's files. Many parents across the country are asking the same question. How did this happen for so long without anyone stopping it? Elijah's expression darkened, not in anger, but in gravity. Because the system doesn't call it racism, he said. It calls it metrics. It calls it policy. It hides bias inside paperwork. He pulled a printed page from the folder in front of him. It was a copy of the internal spreadsheet, highlighted in red, where student names were tagged for low engagement or disciplinary concern. Nearly all the flagged names were black or brown. This is how they do it, he said. They never have to say the word. They just sort you into the places where no one will ask questions. Elaine looked stunned. And your mother, Lorraine Ward, she tried to raise this. Elijah nodded. It was the first time anyone looked at me like I was more than a problem. The screen briefly showed footage from a cell phone clip. Elijah standing in class mid-sentence in perfect Parisian French. The class stunned. A boy's mouth hanging open in awe. It had gone viral before. But now, it had context. It had a voice. Elaine glanced at her notes. You later revealed you'd also translated Swahili, Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin during a refugee crisis with the State Department. At 14. Yes. And your school never acknowledged any of that? No. In fact, they suspended me after I participated in a peaceful walkout. Viewers across the country sat in kitchens and living rooms, mouths slightly agape. Elijah leaned forward. They called me disruptive, but when a white student organizes a protest, they call it brave. They give them leadership awards. Me? I got a suspension letter. Elaine let the moment breathe. The silence was louder than any applause could have been. What would you say, she asked softly, to the educators who failed to see you? Elijah inhaled. I'd say stop measuring brilliance by behavior. Stop equating compliance with potential. And stop calling bias data. He looked into the camera again. I was never your exception. I was your evidence. That line would become the most quoted of the night. By the time the segment ended, hashtags were trending nationwide. I was your evidence.
Audit the districts.
Gifted and black. Thousands of former students, teachers, and parents began sharing stories online. Testimonies poured in, from Boston to Bakersfield, of gifted students misdiagnosed, overlooked, rerouted. One user wrote, I watched that interview and wept. I was Elijah in 2003. Thank you for speaking for those of us who never could. A teacher posted, this has shaken me. I've been complicit in systems I thought I was helping. I'm ready to do better. Elijah Ward had done more than reclaim his voice. He'd shifted the country's gaze. Backstage, as Elijah stepped out of the light and into the hallway where Lorraine waited, he looked taller, not physically, but in presence. In truth, Lorraine embraced him tightly. You were heard, she whispered. He pulled back and smiled. Finally, Elaine Travis walked over, voice quieter now. That was powerful. Thank you for trusting us. Elijah nodded once. Just tell it right. I will. As Elijah and Lorraine walked out of the building into the cool evening air, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Incoming call. Greenridge High School Board. He didn't answer. Then another alert appeared. Voice CML transcript. Mr. Ward, this is the office of Governor Addison. The governor watched your interview and would like to convene an emergency session with the Greenridge School Board tomorrow. Please be aware, we are now officially investigating the district's educational equity practices. Elijah raised his eyebrows, handed the phone to Lorraine. Your voice just moved the governor, she said with pride. No, Elijah corrected. All I did was speak. It's the truth that moved them. As they get into the car, another email lands in Elijah's inbox. Subject line 2025 Rhodes Youth Fellowship nomination. Urgent response required. The email came with no fanfare. Just a line in Elijah's inbox from the school secretary. Mandatory school assembly. Friday. Full attendance expected. He thought nothing of it. Greenridge held these often. Announcements. Seasonal programs, pep rallies. He assumed it was another attempt at control after the chaos of the past month. But Friday arrived with a strange calm. The hallways were quieter. Teachers wore unspoken anticipation. Even the students, those who'd walked out with him, those who once laughed at him, seemed to buzz with energy that had nothing to do with routine. By 10 hours a.m., the entire student body was seated in the auditorium. Elijah sat near the back. As always, Lorraine had insisted on coming and was quietly ushered to the side aisle by staff who now greeted her like someone worth listening to. Principal Royce stepped onto the stage. The mic crackled, then settled. Good morning, students, faculty, guests. There was polite clapping. Royce cleared his throat. Today's assembly is different. Today we're not here to discipline or to direct. We're here to correct. Heads turned. Royce continued. Our institution has made mistakes. We've allowed systems to overshadow souls, numbers to replace names, silence to replace celebration. And today, we begin to repair that. The side curtain parted. A representative from Norbridge University, one of the top 10 institutions in the country, walked on stage. She held a small velvet box in one hand and a cream-colored envelope in the other. Elijah froze. Students of Greenridge High, she began. Today we honor a student whose brilliance survived silence, whose intellect grew in shadows, and whose voice, when finally heard, helped shift the course of a nation's conversation. Whispers spread. Phones lifted. Elijah Ward, she said. Please come forward. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then Maya nudged his arm gently. That's you. He stood. Slowly walked the aisle. Every step felt unreal. The applause started softly. Then rose. And rose. By the time Elijah reached the stage, the entire auditorium was on its feet. Students cheered. Staff clapped. Some even wiped their eyes. Not from guilt, but from witnessing. The Norbridge rep extended the envelope. We are awarding you a full academic scholarship to Norbridge University. Tuition, room, board, books. You've already proven you can change the world. We just want to be part of your journey. Elijah took it. Hands steady. A teacher in the front row began clapping louder. Others joined. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. Principal Royce gestured toward the mic. Would you like to say something? Elijah stepped forward. The room quieted. He looked over the sea of faces, some familiar, some transformed. Maya, Miss Calder, his mother radiant with tears. Students who once looked past him now held their breath. He leaned toward the mic and said 5 words. I was never the problem. Gasps. Silence. Then thunder. The applause that followed didn't sound like pity. It didn't sound like performative support. It sounded like release, like recognition, like truth, finally given a name. For once, Elijah wasn't the quietest in the room. No child should be punished for being misunderstood. No voice should be silenced because of the color it comes in. If this story made you pause, made you feel something, then don't stay silent too. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.